This play is sponsored by the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, a state-funded grant project of the California State Library.
There was a big gate out front with the sign, Arbeit macht frei. You know German, Steve?
A little.
It means work makes you free. I was 18, but I wasn't stupid. I knew right away that no one was going to get out alive.
LA Theatre Works presents A Good Day at Auschwitz by Stephen Tobolowsky, directed by Lyse Erikson, starring Alan Mandell and Stephen Tobolowsky. The extraordinary true story of Abe, a man the playwright met at his synagogue. Abe was a man of great humor and heart, who not only survived 3 years at Auschwitz, but fell in love there. Abe's life speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, renewal, and hope, even when there seems to be none. And now, A Good Day at Auschwitz by Stephen Tobolowsky, produced by LA Theatre Works.
The Kaddish is the Jewish prayer for the dead. Surprisingly, it doesn't mention death at all. It only extols the greatness of God, eternity, peace. I loved the Kaddish when I was a child. The prayer had a great rhythmic quality. It also meant the service was almost over. When my mother died, I felt like I needed to do something to honor her. I visited Rabbi Benson, the new rabbi at my old synagogue. He explained that it is the obligation of a Jewish child to say the Kaddish twice a day, at dawn and sunset, for 11 months for the loss of a parent. He said this almost apologetically, knowing that this tradition began when people didn't have electricity. It was easier to knock off work at sunset when your job was gathering sticks. Rabbi Benson didn't understand that I was not a normal person. I was an actor. I lived in a state of almost constant unemployment. Time was not my problem. As an experiment, I decided to commit to saying the Kaddish as prescribed, 11 months twice a day, 7:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Over the last few decades, I noticed a decided trend away from commitment. I took it as a sign that society was disenchanted with the future. Obligations were too expensive. I decided to be a rebel and honor a 2,000-year-old tradition. I had an escape clause to my commitment. I had to find a synagogue that had morning and evening services. These were in decline. Synagogues had an escape clause too. Saying Kaddish was contingent on having what they call a minyan. 10 people had to be present. Morning cappuccino had eaten into the population base of people willing to pray at dawn. I was somewhat disappointed when I found a synagogue nearby that offered daily services. I faced my first test, honoring the promise I made to myself. I showed up the next morning. The minyan was mainly comprised of old men with nowhere else to go. They noted a new face in their midst. I was nervous to stand up and recite the Kaddish prayer. They watched me as I stumbled through the ancient Aramaic with difficulty. I began to suffer from performance anxiety as I said the words. I picked up bits and pieces of the English translation as I went along. Let his great name be blessed forever and to all eternity. Blessed, praised, glorified, exalted, extolled, mighty, upraised, and lauded be the name of the Holy One. He who creates peace in his celestial heights, may he create peace for us and for all Israel.
Amen.
At the end of services, a short old man shuffled over to me and shook my hand. He smiled.
Welcome. You're here for your mother?
Yes. How did you know?
Well, it was the way you said her name. I could tell it wasn't a wife or a child. You're welcome here. See you tonight.
Yes.
Tonight, then, is your date. By the way, my name is Abe. I'm retired. I guess you could tell that.
Saying the Kaddish proved to be unpredictable. and there's almost nothing as seductive as the unpredictable. I was surprised that after the novelty wore off, I began to look forward to my time in synagogue. As I said the prayer, I thought of my mother. I would laugh, cry, wander in thought, or get caught in an unexpected memory. Instead of marking the periphery of my day, saying the Kaddish marked its spiritual center. And none of it would be possible without 9 other people walking through the door. If you didn't have 10, you went home. I watched and counted. 9 strangers, 9 people that were most likely there for the same reason. Grief. Whether it was the intensity of the experience or having to get up too early on a regular basis, I began to bond with those who came every morning to stand up for the magnificence and eternity of God. Susie and Rita, Rolf and Paul. There was a different kind of respect I had for Leonard and Abe and Manny. They didn't come to mourn. They came to ensure that there were 10. They knew from personal experience how much it meant to say the prayer. They knew the pain of missing an opportunity for want of a 10th person. Coming to Minyan was their mitzvah, or good deed. Judaism is based on performing mitzvahs and acts of charity. In Barry Holtz's classic work, Back to the Sources, he points out the differences the translation of a word has on an idea, and the example he gives is charity. The Christian concept of charity is defined by its root word caritas, which is Latin for love or caring. The Hebrew word for charity is tzedakah, which doesn't mean love or caring at all. It comes from the root meaning justice. There was always a sense that making the minyan and praying for those we had lost was not an act of love, but an act of justice for the departed. As an act of justice, our present grief was given a larger voice. In praying to God, we found an advocate of sufficient power to help us work through our sorrow. And this mighty cosmic turn was performed with the assistance of 9 of the most unheroic-looking people. Young secretaries, old housewives, retired bookkeepers, a retired hat maker. I found out that Abe, in his prime, owned a liquor store. Rolf was an author. Rita had escaped the Soviet Union and now worked for NBC. Services were not social events, they were societal. When we finished, there was no chit-chat, no, hey, do you want to get together sometime for dinner? There was just a smile and a shrug, maybe a polite, have a good day, see you tomorrow. So I was surprised when Abe came up to me after morning minyan.
Mr. Steve.
Yes, Abe.
Are you busy?
Not really.
You want some breakfast? Maybe a corned beef sandwich? It's on me. I'm celebrating.
Well, sure, Abe. I'm not doing anything.
Do you have a car? Mine is in the shop. My mechanic is a criminal.
Sure, Abe. I could drive.
Mr. Steve, I don't know your last name.
Tobolowsky.
Tobolowsky. Are you Polish?
I think. Polish, Russian. I'm not sure.
Did your family come from Drobin?
Maybe. You know, that sounds familiar.
To think our families might have been neighbors.
That would have been great.
Not really. Drobin was filled with sons of bitches, real bastards. You didn't want to live there.
I led the way to the synagogue parking lot. Or I tried to. It was impossible to walk slowly enough to keep up with Abe. You almost had to walk backwards. His legs and feet seemed to move. He just didn't go anywhere. Come to think of it, it is a perfect metaphor for the morning minyan. For most of us, progress wasn't about forward motion. It was about making sense of the past. Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it, Abe? Almost there. Yep. Hey, let me get that door for you.
Why, look at me. I got a chauffeur. I'll be there in a minute.
Abe maneuvered with considerable difficulty into the front seat, then made his first attempt to fasten his seatbelt. Abe, you need a hand there?
No, Mr. Steve, I could do a seatbelt. You think I'm a sugar? What's the rush? We got all morning.
Abe directed me to a little storefront I had never heard of called Marvin's Deli. We were seated at what our waitress assured me was Abe's favorite table.
So, Abe, what's the celebration?
Well, Mr. Steve, that is quite the story. I went to the dermatologist 2 weeks ago. A nice man, Iranian, good doctor. I had a spot on the top of my head. He said I should have removed. He wanted to have it biopsied. It was hot in the office, so I took off my jacket, and he saw this.
Abe pulled up the sleeve of his sports jacket and showed me his arm. There was a tattoo of a line of numbers, 80633.
You know what this is, Mr. Steve?
I think so, Abe.
You ever seen this one before?
No, not for real.
Well, this is for real, believe you me. Auschwitz. I was there for 3 years.
Abe,
So you ask, what am I celebrating? My Iranian doctor saw this and said he would remove it. Today is the day. I go to see him this afternoon. Today will be the last day of my life. I will have to look at 80633. And you know how much it's going to cost.
no, Abe.
Nothing. Can you believe it? Not a penny. Normally, tattoo removal costs $2,000. $2,000! That's no joke. My Iranian said he would do it for free. He said, Abe, you paid enough already. How do you like that? There's a good story for you.
Yes, Abe. That's a very good story.
Our waitress brought us 2 bowls of matzo ball soup and 2 sandwiches. Abe winked and blew her a kiss. She patted him on the shoulder and went about her work.
She's my girlfriend.
Over soup and corned beef sandwiches, Abe began telling me about his candy store in New York.
I sold newspapers, magazines, and all sorts of candy. The candy business is very good. Everybody likes candy.
Did you open a candy store out here?
No, I went into the dry cleaning business. I worked for a couple of maniacs. I tried to keep them from killing one another. I mean, who needs that? So I quit and opened up another type of candy store, but I sold liquor instead. Everybody likes liquor. You like liquor, Mr. Steve?
Well, sure, Abe.
Well, there you go. So what do you do for a living?
I'm an actor.
Oh, you can make a living at that.
I depend on the kindness of strangers.
You what?
Nothing, Abe. I've been lucky.
I know all about that. I'm a very lucky man. Always have been. But I try not to be lucky about business. I worked hard at it for years. Do you know how candy, liquor, and dry cleaning are the same?
They all use plastic bags?
No, they all use arithmetic.
Oh.
You have to have a good head for numbers. I was always a good student. That's how I got the girls. If I helped them with their homework, maybe they would help me out by giving me a kiss.
Abe, you are naughty.
You betcha, Mr. Steve. Say, you know your Gemara?
It was always hard to follow Abe's transitions, but the shift from teen sex to the Talmud would strip anyone's mental gears. I knew from my days at Temple Emmanuel the Gemara was commentary on the Jewish law. It dated back to around 300 to 500 CE, but in truth, the Talmud and the Gemara come from ideas that went back hundreds of years before that.
I'm familiar with it, Abe.
Good. So here's the question. 2 men are walking in the woods. They find a tallis, a prayer shawl, lying on the ground. One man says it should go to him because he saw it first. The other man said he should get it because he is more devout. Who gets the prayer shawl?
I don't know, Abe. Who gets it?
I don't know. I hoped you would know. My whole life I've wanted to know the answer. You never heard of this?
No, Abe, never. I'm sorry.
Abe shook his head and was silent for a moment. He raised his eyebrows as if in answer to some invisible presence before him. He turned back to me.
Don't worry about it. I just wanted to know who gets the prayer shawl. You want to get a schnapps?
A schnapps?
Yes, it's a drink, a little drink. My apartment is down the street. We could get just a little touch to start the day. When I was a boy, I would go to morning services with my father. The men would say the Kaddish, and then they would all come out into the street and have a little vodka, a little schnapps, before they had to go to work.
I don't know, Abe. I have a rule about not drinking before 9 a.m.
Oh, come on, don't be a spoil sport. Are you working today? Are you doing your acting?
No, Abe. I am currently unemployed.
Right, so a little drink wouldn't hurt. In fact, it may help. I guarantee it will help.
Abe's apartment smelled like old pants and matzo balls. He gestured for me to sit at the dining room table covered with a pile of unopened mail and 3 do-it-yourself blood pressure monitors.
Make yourself at home.
Abe pushed aside some mail to make an opening for me.
Thanks, Abe.
The drugstores keep sending me these damn blood pressure things, pardon my French. They want my business. I'm getting the last laugh. You know why?
No, Abe.
I'm keeping the blood pressure things and not going to their stores. Mr. Steve, do you know how to use one of these?
No, Abe. I've only played a doctor on TV.
Right, I don't know either. Someday I'll find someone who knows how to use these, and from then on, free blood pressure.
He went to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a bottle of schnapps, which technically was not schnapps, but Canadian Club whiskey. We had a toast. Abe shot the Canadian Club down the hatch. I had to nurse mine.
Come on, Mr. Steve. I'm waiting on you.
I'm working on it, Abe. What's the rush? We've got all morning.
You've only had one shot. One is like none. You need to have a second. Then you've had 2. 2 is like 1, which I mentioned is like none, so it's best if you start with 3. Then you don't have to worry. Mr. Steve, I have something I want to show you.
From his pocket, Abe pulled a keychain with a small plastic box attached to it.
Take a look in there.
I took the keys and peered into the little hole at one end of the plastic box. Abe reached over and redirected me toward the window.
You have to look toward the light.
The box on the keychain was a dime store camera obscura. It was a trinket like you would usually see in tourist shops, preloaded with a picture of the Grand Canyon or Pikes Peak. Inside Abe's key bob was the image of a woman and a child by a hotel swimming pool.
That's my wife and son. This picture is from when we went to Miami Beach, 1964.
She's beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. She was a beauty, better than I deserved. But she could spend you into the grave, let me tell you. The woman, she loved to shop. And what's worse, she bought things.
I guess it made her happy.
Happy? It made her crazy happy, but that's why I lost my hair. You see that place there?
The television.
Yeah, the floor in front of it. That's where she fell down.
Who fell down?
My wife. She woke up one morning. She walked toward the kitchen. She screamed and fell right there on that spot. I jumped out of bed. She said she couldn't move. Maybe she had a stroke or something. Maybe she had something wrong with her brain. I don't know. I got her to the doctor. She never recovered. For 2 years I took care of her. She passed away last year.
I'm so sorry, Abe.
Yes, it was terrible. I loved her so much. She was my life. But now I have all these sweaters. So what size is your wife?
Abe became my new buddy, my drinking buddy. Abe loved to drink. I got the idea he felt there was a stigma in drinking alone, even in his own apartment. As long as I was there, it was a party. We moved from shot glasses to juice glasses and played 7-card stud. One morning, after services, we returned to his apartment for schnapps and poker. In mid-hand, Abe broke into a huge grin and said,
"My uncle killed a Cossack."
I looked up from my pair of threes.
You know what a Cossack is?
Yul Brynner?
What?
Yul Brynner and Taras Bulba?
Speak English, if you please.
It was a movie.
I never watched them.
They rode horses, they lived on the steppes. He killed Tony Curtis.
Exactly. That's it, exactly. Real sons of bitches. I remember when I was a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, my father took me to services. We finished the cottage, and all of us went onto the square to have a little shot.
You had vodka when you were 7?
Right. Oh, whatever. It was a custom. Morning in the square was like the New York Times. We all had a shot and kibitzed. We'd talk. It's how we got our news. So one morning, this Cossack rode into the square. He was drunk. He gave a kick here or there to someone, man, woman. It didn't matter. My father called out to him to move along. The Cossack stopped, turned, and rode back toward him. He pulled out this horsewhip and smacked my father, calling him a Jew dog. Then the Cossack rode out of the square. Everything went back to normal, talking and drinking. Then there was real trouble. The Cossack comes riding back. He starts whipping people. He whips this boy and says, "Tell me what you are. Tell me you are a Jewish dog. Tell me you are a Jew dog." This guy was a real bastard. My father pushed me into a booth where they sold odds and ends. He told me to stay down, not to come out, but I saw it all. This son of a bitch was riding through the crowd, beating people. He sees my father again and heads our way. And that's when my uncle stepped in front of his horse. He yelled at the Cossack, told him he was drunk and to ride on.
Where were the police?
You got to be kidding. There were no police. There was one man, like a sheriff, who would get volunteers if he needed to bring someone in. And they would have been on the Cossack side. Those farmers were just as bad when they were drinking. And the posse was always drinking. Forget about the police. So the Cossack rides up to my uncle and rears back to whip him. And that was his big mistake. My uncle was fast and strong. And as the Cossack swung, my uncle grabbed the whip and pulled him off his horse. He beat the Cossack with his own whip, and then he killed him with his boot. He came down right on his head, right in front of me. I saw it all.
My God, Abe, what happened?
Well, my uncle was as good as dead for killing the Cossack. We all knew that. He couldn't stick around. He cried and hugged my father. He swore he would see us again one day. He promised. He jumped on the Cossack's horse and rode like crazy out of the town.
Unbelievable.
Oh, that's not the half of it. It was never safe. Killing Jews was a popular pastime. This is why Hitler could do what he did. They killed my dog, Blackie, because we were Jewish. Blackie never did a thing. How about a piece of apple cake? They give it to me free at the bakery. They love me there.
Sure, Abe. I followed Abe into the kitchen. He opened a pink bakery box that had a torn-up piece of strudel in it.
Yikes, this looks like it was in the trash.
Almost, Mr. Steve, almost. They throw them out after 2 days. That's when I show up at the store. I'm no fool. This is normally $5 a slice. They give me the whole thing for free. There's a plate in the cabinet over there.
Maybe just a taste, Abe.
Don't be shy. I have plenty.
Okay.
I picked up a dirty knife out of the sink and sliced off a chunk.
Just a bite or two to coat my stomach from the schnapps. So, what happened to your uncle?
Well, that night, the police came to our house and wanted to search the premises. My father asked, "What for?" They said, "We're looking for your brother-in-law." My dad said, "Well, why don't you go look for him at his house?" Were they kidding? He killed a Cossack and he was Jewish. They thought he was going to sit around and have dinner. My uncle was long gone. In fact, he was probably already out of the damn country, pardon my French. What a bunch of dumb bastards.
Oh, Abe, I called some of my relatives in Dallas, and they don't think our family came from Drawbin.
Then they were lucky. But wherever they came from in Poland, it was probably the same. The place was filled with anti-Semites.
Well, there must have been something nice about the town.
Trees. There were lots of trees.
Okay, seriously, Abe.
No, I am serious. I liked the trees. I would meet a girl in school, help her with her homework. I'd ask her if she wanted to go on a date. If she said yes, we headed for the forest. We didn't need no drive-in movie. There was no place else to go. We didn't need no other place to go. The woods were fine. I liked the trees.
Abe, you are a rascal. I'm getting more apple cake. You want any?
No, thank you, but help yourself. I'm dealing 7-card stud.
I'm in. Abe, when did you know there was trouble with the Nazis in Germany?
When they took over our whole goddamn country.
So it just happened, like overnight.
Well, it seemed that way to us. The Polish army went to fight them. It was over before it started. In 2 weeks, all of our boys were dead or running back home. The Nazis drove into our village when I was 16. They came riding in a line of trucks, shooting guns into the air.
Where did they go first?
Well, they set up headquarters in the church.
Which church?
Well, we only had one. After they set up there, they met with the business leaders in the main saloon. They announced that they were closing the schools and synagogue and setting up a system of work details for the men and boys. Now, let me tell you, Mr. Steve, this was hard labor. Sometimes 16 hours a day, breaking rocks, digging ditches, moving boulders. Meaningless work. Maybe once in a while we would build a road, but usually it was just work.
Abe looked at his cards.
The Nazis ordered the Judenrat, the Council of Jewish Leaders in the town, to organize who would work.
So the Jewish leaders were in on it.
Steve, they ran it. Of course, if they didn't, they would be shot.
There is that.
Don't get me wrong. The Judenrat were bastards, too. They would make sure their friends or family never had to work. If you paid them a bribe, maybe they would leave your name off the rolls. Maybe.
Abe laid out 3 aces.
I think you lose.
I laid out my 4 cards straight.
We call that bupkis. You know what bupkis is?
I can guess.
And you would be right. Now you can tell your friends you know how to say nothing in Yiddish.
I should go, Abe.
No, not yet. Don't be a sore loser. Have one more drink.
Maybe just half a glass, Abe.
I had a brother, Tovia.
Abe's eyes lit up with admiration just mentioning his brother's name.
He was older than me. Tovia was smart, smarter than me by a long shot, especially about religious things. Every morning he read the Torah in our little shul, but Tovia was always sick and weak. They put his name on the list to work. My mother put him to bed. I went in and worked for him. One of the men of the Judenrat saw that I was working for my brother. He called out to me, "Are you trying to fool me? If you can work for your brother, you're strong enough to work for me too." He went back and put my name on the list for that day. I would have to work a double shift. I worked day and night, and that bastard was a Jew. The work details went on for a couple of months. We got used to it. Then the Nazis began breaking up the Jewish families. They would send half of a family away to a different city. If you never knew where half of your family was, you would do what you were told. If you missed work or tried to escape, it could lead to big trouble for them. So one day the Nazis brought in a lot of trucks. They came to our house at dawn. They woke us up. Half of our family was being relocated to work. Me and my mother, Hannah Fega, my brother Tovia, and my sisters Cyril and Golda were sent to Piotrków, to the Jewish ghetto. The ghetto was a part of the city that was walled off. Any Jew that tried to escape was shot, no ifs, ands, or buts. Inside the ghetto there was little food or water. Steve, you never could imagine anything like this. I was 16, but I had eyes. I could see there was no future here, only death. We had no food. My mother couldn't walk anymore. She was getting weaker by the day. We had a family meeting. We decided to split up. Me and Tovia and Cyril would try to escape from the ghetto and get back to our village. My little sister Golda would stay with my mother. We left that night. I never saw them again. I think they were starved to death.
Abe.
Rotten bastards. The three of us escaped at midnight. Cyril and I were strong, but Tovia was smart. He was the best of us all. We traveled day and night, staying away from the roads, hiding in the forests. To tell you the truth, it was fun. We stole eggs from farmers and slept under the trees. We made it 140 miles before we were captured by the Nazis. They didn't believe us when we said we came from Piotrków. It was too far away. So they sent us to the nearest town, Warsaw. They sent us to the ghetto there. Let me tell you, this was the worst place on earth, Steve. It was worse than Piotrków. There was no food. There were bodies on the sidewalks. So that night, we escaped again. We were like the Three Musketeers. We were a team. This time we made it back to our village. My oldest brother Simon was still living at the house. Everyone else was gone. My other brothers, Meyer, Judah, and Hyman, all went east. Simon said he thought they were going to join the Russian army.
Where was your father?
Dead, Steve. Simon told us that he died right after we were sent away, but he died quick on Sabbath night, right at the table. He had a schnapps. He felt weak. And that was that.
I'm sorry, Abe.
What can you do? Even though we didn't have a minion, we said Kaddish for my father in the kitchen that night. The four of us held hands. It was nice. For a couple of months, we had a home again.
Abe, hold up a second. I have a different sort of question.
No, fire away.
Okay. This isn't just a nightmare. This is a series of nightmares. How could you keep going?
Stephen, I have to tell you the God's honest truth. We all thought the war would be over soon. The Germans were so strong we thought it would be done in a week or two at the most. Then we would go back to Piotrków and get Mother and Golda and bring them home. There were wars like this for centuries, and it was always about land or money. We figured someone would pay someone, and that would be that. We didn't think too much about the Germans being anti-Semites because the Polacks were anti-Semites too. We were used to it. We had no idea. One morning, the Germans said they were removing all of the Jews from our village. We were transported to another ghetto in the town of Malava. We lived there for a month. Then one night, at 1 a.m, soldiers came knocking on our door. They told us at gunpoint we had to leave everything behind. We were being sent out on another work detail. They put us on a train bound for Auschwitz.
My 11 months of saying the Kaddish ended. Rabbi Yolka told me there's a tradition that when the mourning period is finished, the members of the congregation walk the mourner out of the synagogue and back into the world. In my case, that meant around the courtyard and back to the chapel for my car keys. I wish I could say I left my grief behind. My post-Kaddish crisis appeared in a surprising form. I didn't want to stop coming to services. I didn't want to stop saying the prayer for my mother. The first part of the equation was easy enough to solve. I went to services the next morning. But now my role was different. I no longer stood to say the prayer. I remained seated. I became the community that answered. When I walked into the chapel, everyone was happy to see me. There was a special recognition in the eyes of Manny and Rolf and Leonard. They had come for years to ensure that there was a minyan for the mourners. I had joined their ranks, the supporting cast, a perfect role for a character actor. Abe shuffled in and greeted me.
I wondered if you would show up today. It's good to see you. Breakfast at the deli?
Sure, Abe, sure.
I got something important to show you. Very important.
What is it?
You'll have to wait and see.
Services commenced. The Kaddish came and I didn't stand. At first I felt like I was betraying my mother. Then I sensed I was a part of something bigger. The notion of tzaddik, justice, moved me. It was important being a witness to the sorrow in the room. Sorrow needs a witness. It's the only way it can heal. It's the only way it could turn into something new. Perhaps wisdom. After services, I drove Abe to the deli. We ordered matzo ball soup and corned beef sandwiches.
So, I've been to the doctor.
How you doing?
Oh, it's hopeless, Steve. The doctor says I'm a wreck. My kidneys don't work. My stomach has a hole in it. My brains are shot. I have diabetes.
Hey, you have diabetes. You shouldn't be drinking.
No, Mr. T, I have to drink. It's the secret of my long life. I get all my nutrition from the schnapps.
Abe.
No, Mr. T, if I stop now, it would shock my system and kill me for good and for sure.
Right. So, what's your surprise?
Well, for the last year we have played cards and talked. Now, you know something about my life. Mm-hmm. So, here is the rest of it. I wrote it for you, my history here. I give it to you.
I looked at the crumpled pages, written in all caps, in pencil, with numerous crossouts. It was precious.
Thank you, Abe.
I put in all of the names and places I remembered. I know you like that.
I do.
After a morning of whiskey and 3-day-old apple cake, I went home and tried to read Abe's history. Most of it I understood. Some of it was still unclear. I felt compelled to put Abe's history in a coherent form. This effort became my new focus during our poker games. I started coming over to Abe's with a notepad and pen. He loved it. He began to walk and talk and gesture as if he were a king returning from long exile. After a few questions, I'd get my schnapps and apple cake. Abe would sit and start dealing poker.
I have a question for you, Abe.
About the Holocaust?
No. How do you get so good at cards?
Well, I was always good at cards. I had a good brain before I lost my marbles. But I had another secret.
I knew it, you cheat.
No, Steve. Girls.
Girls. I don't follow.
You know, I was always good with numbers. I was a good student. Parents would ask me to come over and tutor their kids in arithmetic. I used cards, especially with the girls, to teach them to add.
Abe, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. What does 7 + 4 equal? A jack?
Oh, don't yell at me. I'm telling you the truth. And when I gave lessons, I didn't just give arithmetic lessons, if you know what I mean.
Abe, please. You're making me blush.
I would teach the girls how to play poker. If I won, I got a kiss. It's what you call a win-win situation. They learned how to add, and I got good at poker.
I'm shocked, Abe. Shocked.
What can I say? We didn't have a lot to do in our town.
Abe, I lied. I do have a question about the Holocaust.
Oh, let me have it, Doctor.
What were you doing when the Nazis came into your town?
Steve, I was in school. We went to ordinary school for part of the day, then religious school for the rest of the day. Kids went to a lot of school back then. I was in Cheder, the religious school. We were studying the Gemara. You know what that is?
Yes, Abe.
Right. So our teacher gave us a question. 2 men are walking in the woods. They find a talus on the ground. One man says it should go to him. He saw it first. One man says, no, I should get it. I am the most devout. Who gets it? Or do they split it in 2? Nobody knew. Then people start running past our classroom. Our teacher left the room and talked to another teacher. Then they both run. We never heard the answer of who gets the talus. We just sat in the classroom for a while, then we left. Everybody was running to the town square. The Germans had come into town on trucks, shooting their machine guns in the air, getting everybody's attention.
Did you go to the square?
Yes, Steve. They got my attention.
Abe, what happened when you got to Auschwitz?
Abe got up and went to his cabinet. He pulled out a new bottle of Canadian Club.
The man at the liquor store gave me this for half price, Steve. Can you believe that?
That's a good deal.
No deal, Steve. He's a mensch. He knows I'm a good customer and I don't have much money. He was doing me a good deed. Remember, I used to run a liquor store. I know about the profit margin. You can't afford to give away good whiskey at half price. To the man at the liquor store and the good people everywhere.
To the man at the liquor store.
We drank. Abe sat down and looked at his cards and began arranging them in his hand.
Tovia and Cyril and I, we arrived on the train to Auschwitz-Birkenau. As soon as you got off the train, the women and children were separated from the men and boys who were old enough to work. Most of the women and children were killed within 15 minutes of getting off the train. Cyril was one of them. Tovia was separated from me. He was sent to work at the building with no windows, the crematoria. The bastards from the Judenrat were sent to the crematoria too. Helping the Germans got them nothing.
Abe, why did the building have no windows?
The building was made with no windows, so no one would know what was going on in there, and to muffle the screams. At the beginning, we were led to believe this was a work camp. There was a big gate out front with the sign, Arbeit macht frei. You know German, Steve?
A little.
It means work makes you free. I was 18, but I wasn't stupid. I knew right away that no one was going to get out alive. I was put in the work line. The Nazis put a tattoo on my arm.
Abe showed me his arm where his tattoo used to be.
I was prisoner 80633. From that moment on, I had no name. I was 80633.
What did the number mean?
It was just how many they had brought to the camp. The next would be 80634, 80635, like that. We were guarded by other prisoners. Now, these were called capos. Some were Jewish, some were criminals. My capo was a gay man from Germany, you know, a homosexual.
Right.
He had a tattoo. I can't remember exactly, but his number was low, like in the 10,000s. A number that low meant he had been a prisoner from the beginning. He could even have been one of the prisoners who built Auschwitz. You see, Steve, Germany was not only killing Jews, but also homosexuals. I was lucky. My capo was a hell of a nice guy. His boyfriend's name was David. He used to tell me, "You Jews will survive, but it's over for me and David. We'll never get out of here alive."
Abe told me every morning when he went out to work, Tovia would walk out into the yard by the crematoria and wave to him.
After 3 weeks in the camp, Tovia was no longer there. I called for him again and again. A man from the Judenrat came to the border wires surrounding the crematoria. He shook his head and drew his finger across his throat. At that moment, I knew Tovia was no more.
Abe, what did you do on your work detail?
Nothing. We hit rocks. We made stone walls, cleared brush, nothing. The bastards just wanted to wear us down. But I had some brains. As soon as the guards walked away, I stopped. I'd even take a nap. As soon as I heard them coming, I started working again. I knew the ones that worked all day died. Steve, Auschwitz was just one death camp. There were several, but our camp was responsible for growing and sending potatoes to all the other camps. They put me to work stacking baskets to be shipped out. The 2 Germans guarding me were not Nazis, they were Wehrmacht, that is, the regular army. They were farmers before the war and had no education. They probably couldn't even write their names. They sure couldn't do arithmetic. They were afraid if they made a mistake in how many potatoes they sent to what camp, they would be sent to the Russian front. That was a death sentence. Here's where I got lucky again. I would divide up the potatoes in my head. I figured out how many baskets went to where based on the number of prisoners they had. I helped them. They moved me into the office. That probably saved my life. When I was in the office, they would have me write letters to their families back on the farm, letters to their girlfriends, to their mothers. And I read the letters for them when they came. Let me tell you something, Steve, most important. They were kind. They were kind, my Wehrmacht. If they ever came up to me today and needed something, I would give it to them, anything. Hell of a couple of nice guys. I drink to them.
Abe, did you ever have a good day at Auschwitz?
Many of them. Are you kidding me? I was alive. There were days when the sun was beautiful, or working on the roads, I smelled something nice. But, Steve, we knew there was no tomorrow. We knew there was no hope, so we took pleasure where we could find it.
I'm not sure if hope has ever helped anyone. You know, hope was in Pandora's box.
In what?
Pandora's box?
Well, what the hell are you talking about?
Never mind, nothing.
You don't know nothing, Steve. See, I had one moment of hope, and it helped me plenty. After a year and a half, I looked through the wire to another part of the camp, and I saw Simon, my oldest brother. I yelled, "Simon!" He turned and waved to me. It was only a second, but I knew he was alive, and I knew I was not alone. That was a great day.
Abe, you say you saw your brother and that gave you strength, but you also said you had pleasure where you could find it. Where could you find it? What do you mean? You were in the worst place on earth.
From women. What do you think?
Women. You had women at Auschwitz.
Her name was Hanka. Absolutely beautiful. She was in the women's section. I know I may have rocks for brains now, but I know a beautiful woman. She had black hair and blue eyes. To be with a woman so beautiful, there's nothing like it in the world. We met whenever we could, and you know the best part? When we were together, when we held one another, we called each other by our names.
I need a drink. How often did you see each other?
Are you kidding? Always. I mean, what the hell? I was in the camp 3 years. I was 18, 19, 20 years old. She was 19. What were we supposed to do?
How long could you get away to make love to Hanka without getting caught?
15 minutes. We weren't exactly in a hotel.
Wow. 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 No matter how you cut it, Abe, that's nerve. That is nerve. How did you manage to get to the women's side of the camp?
My 2 German officers, the ones guarding me, they had girlfriends over there too. They would protect me. Like I said, not all of the soldiers were Nazis.
I couldn't do it, Abe. I'd be terrified I'd get caught.
I did get caught.
You're kidding.
Not at all. Understand, Stephen, the SS were bastards. The Gestapo, terrible bastards. But the worst was the Volksdeutsch.
I never heard of that. What is the Volksdeutsch?
It was a German born in Poland who spoke perfect German, perfect Polish, perfect Hebrew, better than me. Perfect Yiddish, better than me. Once I was coming back from my girlfriend, and he stopped me. He asked me where I'd been. I said, nowhere. He said I was lying. I was screwing that girl. But he said it in a filthy Yiddish no Jew would use. I mean, filthy. I told him, no, I was just taking a break from the office. He yelled, no, you weren't. And he picked up a shovel and smashed me in the face with it, split my head open. I was lying on the ground, bleeding. I couldn't move. My 2 Germans came running up. He ordered, get him out of here, give him hell. The Volksdeutsch threw the shovel on the ground and walked off.
What did they do with you, Abe? Did they have a hospital?
Are you kidding me? I would see fools get sick or hurt, and they would ask to go to the hospital. There was no hospital. They sent them straight to the crematoria. I put a clot on my head to soak up the blood, and I went to the office to work. I was bleeding and sick for days. My 2 Germans didn't give me hell. They got me extra food and potatoes. They said, take what you need. We'll keep you here until you're better. Hell of a nice couple of guys. They saved my life, I'm sure.
Whatever happened to them?
I've no idea. We didn't stay at Auschwitz. I was in the camp for 3 years. There was word that the Russians and Americans were close. The Nazis wanted to hide what they were doing. They tried to empty the camps. They brought in trains with open cattle cars, no roof, and loaded us in. They threw chunks of bread into the cart. People would fight for it. If a piece of bread landed in your lap, you were lucky. You would live. There was no water. We ate rain and snow to stay alive.
Abe, I have a horrible question. I don't understand why you were fed anything if the purpose was to kill you.
Because they didn't want to kill us all at once. They needed some to dig the graves, to work the ovens. The train headed for Germany. It was freezing. People died in the car. We stepped over the dead and tried to throw the bodies out. They took us to another camp, not in Poland, farther from the front. We guessed we were headed deep into Germany.
Where did you end up, Abe?
At another death camp, but small, somewhere in the middle of the goddamn forest. Every day we were marched out into the trees, and the Nazis would shoot a few of us as we walked. Every day, a few more. We started with 200 or so. At the end, there were only 35 of us left.
They just murdered you?
Just shot you in the back with pistols for no reason, and left the bodies on the ground.
Not that any of this makes sense to anyone. But why? Why did they do that?
No, that's interesting. See, it was the last day I was in camp. I woke up. The place was deserted. Deserted, Steve. Do you know how I knew it was deserted?
How?
No dogs. Not a sound. No Germans. No one in the machine gun towers. They all snuck out in the middle of the night. There were just a few of us left. We were terrified. We had no idea what happened. The gates were open, wide open. We didn't know if it was a trap or a trick. Some wouldn't leave. They stayed in their bunks. A few of us decided to risk it. We walked out. We made our way through the woods. We saw some of the bodies in the woods had been stripped of their clothes. I think the Germans knew the war was ending, so they killed as many prisoners as they could and switched clothes with them so they could pretend to be Jews and escape. I was too short, so I lived. Lucky again.
Where did you go, Abe?
Well, we had no idea. We kept walking. There were no soldiers anywhere. 3 of us made it to a farmhouse. We looked in the kitchen window, no people. But I could see a framed photograph on the wall. It was the picture of a young man in an SS uniform. I figured it was the son or husband. Someone in the family was a Nazi officer, so we knew we had to be quiet. We hid in their barn. We were there for 3 days. Eventually, the farm woman came out with a shotgun. She shouted to us in the hayloft, "I know you're up there. Come in and get something to eat." She made us breakfast and said, "When you see the Americans, tell them we fed you, that we were good Germans." After the war ended, things were crazy. Some Jews returned home and found everything they owned had been taken away from them. Some were shot dead on the spot. Imagine to survive the camps and to go home only to be murdered. Germans were terrified that the Jews would take revenge. Some did. One Jewish man I knew went into a shop and killed every German in the store. He said he would keep killing them.
What did you do, Abe?
Me? Well, I knew my brother Simon was alive, so I tried to find him. Also, after the war, I have to say, there were women. Stephen, I think they were afraid to say no to a prisoner. It was like we had no power during the war, and now we had all the power. I went to Italy and was helped by the Americans. They gave me shelter and food. I got strong again. We went back to the synagogue.
You still had faith after all of that?
Some did, some didn't. But we all knew the synagogues were the places to meet and get news. After services one day, I met a man. We talked, and he thought he knew my brother. He took me to a house in town, and there he was, Simon, sitting at the table drinking coffee. We couldn't believe it. We had survived.
Abe, you had nothing. You had no money, no papers, no possessions after the war. How did you live?
The synagogues.
I don't follow.
We went to the shul. Each of us tore out a page from a prayer book. We held it up wherever we went. People would see the page, and they knew who we were. They gave us food, they gave us transportation, they gave us clothes. We just showed them the torn page with the Hebrew prayers. It was our passport. It was all the papers we needed.
Did you go back to your home in Droben?
Are you crazy? Those Polacks were the worst anti-Semites of all. I stayed in Germany and Italy where they were afraid of us. I sold clothing.
Abe, what was the craziest thing you ever got with your page from the prayer book?
Motorcycle.
You're kidding.
God's honest truth. I went to Germany and bought clothes. I took them on my motorcycle to Italy and sold them with my brother. Then I got Italian blouses and rode back up to Germany. We sold everything. Oh, let me tell you, Steve, it was a good time to be Abe.
This is LA TheatreWorks' production of A Good Day at Auschwitz by Stephen Tobolowsky, directed by Lyse Erikson. Our story continues in Hour 2. I'm Susan Loewenberg, producing director of LA TheatreWorks.